Hello. Long time no see. So I don't think I've uploaded for basically a month, something like that, since I got back from Egypt. Maybe not quite that long, but something has been rushing through me, and also part of it was because my microphone broke and things like that. I think it was all perfectly timed and divinely ordained, but just the last couple of weeks I've had this thing coming through me around telling your story and how important that is for your healing, but also how important that is for other people. And I've kind of had this back and forth with it around the sort of narcissistic, self-indulgent side of things. And, I don't really want to feed into that within myself, but equally, I also understand that, I love hearing people's stories. That's basically what I do for a living, it's listen to people's stories and sit and understand that with them, and how much of a powerful shift you can experience just from hearing somebody's story. And so last night there was just this message coming through so strongly about, when it was basically saying drop the masks, collectively, as we enter into these shadow months, autumn, winter, the shadow season, to really drop the masks, that now is the time more than ever to drop those masks. This is what we are being invited into. And the message was very clear. It was okay, so when you hide, you grant not only the people around you, the people you share with on social media, you grant the whole world, you grant the cabal, you grant the dark brotherhoods, you grant everybody permission to continue to hide. And I was like, okay, I get it, because we're all so intertwined and interlinked. We're all made up of these same particles. And so when I'm doing something, that mirrors to somebody else, and that mirrors to somebody else, and that mirrors to somebody else. And it becomes just this self-fulfilling cycle where we all remain in the darkness, and not a healthy kind of dark, but one where we're actively hiding. And that's exactly what I profess to not want for the world and to not want for myself. And so this is why on this really deep level, I feel that I'm being called just to share a little bit more about me and my story. And being a healer, it's that thing of I share all about all this healing stuff all the time, and I don't share about how I've healed and where I am on my healing journey and what's got me to the place where I am. And I maybe have kind of touched on it and alluded to it and things like that, but I haven't gone into any real depth. And that's what I feel I need to do for the next part of my healing journey, is to just be very candid about that. And so I'm thinking I'm probably going to do 2 parts. It's a whole life here. I'm 29 years old. So, just like all of us, we have all of these, this magical and amazing, we have these magical and amazing stories. And to do them justice, we don't want to rush them. So just a little trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about some deep topics here, some potentially triggering topics. And I'm probably likely going to touch on racism. I'm going to touch on prostitution. I'm going to touch on drug abuse. I'm going to touch on alcohol abuse. I'm going to touch on trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault. So you have been forewarned. So I'm going to start just with just how I arrived on this planet, I suppose. And I was born in Scotland, in Edinburgh in 1994, and my birth name is Courtney, and I still go by that name in some circles, but I received the name Shakti in 2021 in a dream, and it was a very mystical dream. I could do a whole video about what was going on with me at that time as well. And I knew that that was my name. I was like, holy shit, that is my name. It resonated so strongly with me, and I wasn't even really that aware of the meaning of it at that time. And I looked it up and it meant cosmic force, and I never ever thought I would actually use the name. And then a little while later, it became very, very clear from spirit that that was the name that I was being called to actually use. And so, I'm a published writer, poet, performer under the name Courtney. And so I don't, I use it in some circles. However, when I meet people now, I generally introduce myself as Shakti. And so I was born in 1994, March. I'm a Pisces, and things were, I would say, initially challenging for me growing up because my parents separated when I was 2. I'm born to a Black mother and a white father, and I've kind of touched on before that was challenging for me growing up mixed race in Scotland, being seen for the most part as Black. People wouldn't think that I was my father's daughter. People would be really confused when I said my dad was white. And, Scotland's a lot more multicultural now than it was 25, 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Things have really shifted here. And so it was very challenging for me going to school, and kids pick up on difference. They pick up on people who are not confident. I was a very, very shy child. And so that very much led me to, being seen as different. I was also incredibly sensitive. And, that was, something that was remarked upon a lot by the people around me. I was very, very, very sensitive and very, in tune with the energies around me. And we don't live in a world that supports that very much. We live in a world that criticizes that and denigrates that and sees it as a quality which is inferior. And I very much felt that from a young age. And, I was very quiet in school. The teacher would call my name and I used to suck my thumb and I would just wave with my pinky finger. I wouldn't even say anything. And the teacher used to say, gosh, if you ever say that you're here, if you ever say that you're present, I'm going to fall off my chair. She used to kind of have a joke with me about it. And it was just known that I was very quiet. Courtney never spoke. That was kind of the energy around it. And, my mom is Black, as I had mentioned, but my mom was adopted by a white family. And, this was in the late 60s. And so you can imagine that growing up in the UK and then in Scotland, growing up in England and then in Scotland around that time was wrought with racism. And so I think that very much gave my mum a huge inferiority complex, led to her feeling as though she was less than. And of course, what do? We mimic the actions of the adults around us. My mum was my primary caregiver. I saw my dad on the weekends. And so from my perspective, I had this Black single mother who really struggled with her mental health. And then I had, my white father, who to me seemed like he had this perfect life. My dad remarried, and, my mum was single for a long time, a good few years, from when they split up. And so it seemed to me that, my dad had what was acceptable, what was socially acceptable, and my mum didn't, which led to me further internalizing racism and, feeling as though there was something very much wrong with me because I was Black, or because I was racialized as Black, being a mixed race person. And from a very young age, I would go into the bathroom at my dad's house at the weekend, and my dad had a white partner, and I used to put her makeup on my face and just stare at myself in the mirror when I was probably about 6 or 7. And looking back, I can see how traumatized I was as a child from experiencing racism. I'd had so many things happen already at that age. Things like being in McDonald's with my mom and my older brother, he's about 20 months older than me, so we're very, very close in age. And my mom took us to go and sit down, and she went up to go and get the food, and these two girls came and sat where my mum would have been sitting. And one of them said, oh, I think that woman's sitting here, like, I think those are her kids. And the other woman was like, black bitch, like, I'm not, I think I said the F word as well, as in, like, I don't care. And, you know, I was maybe about 4 years old at that time, hearing my mum being referred to like that. And I remember my mum came over and, you know, she sensed the energy straight away that obviously me and my little brother were sitting there like, oh my God. And, you know, she obviously removed us from that situation and we found seats elsewhere. So that, I wish I could say that was like completely uncommon. There was situations like that, some more subtle, some as overt as that I experienced throughout my whole childhood. And I didn't have the language, I didn't have the historical context of a world that has been formed by the transatlantic slave trade. I didn't have that deep understanding that I have now of what I was experiencing and why. And so that just led to me internalizing it all and seeing it as there was something inherently wrong with me, plus that being mirrored to me through my family dynamics, not intentionally, but me seeing, you know, my mom has, you know, a lot less money than my dad. My mom is struggling with her mental health. I'm not seeing that from my dad. You know, all of these things that led me to believe that being black was inferior, plus all of the media narratives, which, you know, particularly 20, 30 years ago were very, very common. You know, I rarely saw black people on the television. I rarely saw black women presented in a way that was not highly sexualized. And so that definitely informed the way that I felt about myself. Plus all the racism I experienced in primary school, just from people around me. It was crazy. Like when I look back at it, I'm like, how did anybody let this happen? You know, it was really, really horrific, you know. And even when I was in sort of primary 5, I was attacked by, I think about 8 or 9 boys in my class, all attacked me. It was like a game of Tig gone wrong. And, you know, this was racially motivated because I was the only black girl in my class. So I was seen as different. I was seen as the ugly one. I was, you know, it was always, people were always remarking upon the way that I looked. It was always like, Courtney's got a big nose. Courtney's got big lips. Courtney's ugly. You know, that was very much the kind of chat around me. And so, because I was different, you know, I looked different to everybody else, and children pick up on that. And so, you know, it was, you know, I can't remember exactly what happened, but it ended up with me on the floor and all of these boys stamping on me, kicking me, laughing at me while I was crying. And I ended up managing to escape and run to the toilet, and I ended up vomiting in the toilet and hyperventilating, and, you know, teachers had to come and get me. My mum got called, and, you know, it was never really, the issue of it was never really resolved, which was that it was racist. You know, that was the issue behind all of this, was that these children had this unconscious racism toward, and probably conscious racism as well, towards me, you know. And there was another boy, and I was maybe slightly older at this point. I was maybe like primary 6, so I was probably like 10 or 11. And there was a boy that used to chase me around the playground, saying that he was going to slaughter me like a nigger pig. And at this point, I was almost like hardened to the racism I was experiencing. And, you know, I was a really fast runner. And so he used to chase me around the playground, and I was so much faster than him that I just used to run away, you know. But it was things like that at the age of 10 or 11, I've already built up this shield against the racism that I was experiencing. And, you know, so at the sort of, by the end of primary school, I'd stopped attending school regularly. And I had, you know, I'd kind of, I was trying to understand myself within the context of entering puberty and things like that. And it very much became clear to me that kind of, typical experience that young people have, where, you know, they start sort of interacting with members of the opposite sex, you know, that wasn't going to be my experience. And that was very, very plain, made very, very plain to me by the boys around me, you know, that I was not seen as like the white girls, you know, and that very much, you know, it affected my already very low self-esteem and self-worth. And, you know, and throughout primary, I always seemed to attract friends, you know, because there was a pain match there who needed to make me feel lesser than them, you know. So even in my closest friendships at primary school, I was seen as sort of, you know, beneath. I was like the lackey, you know. I wasn't, not many of my friendships were equal, had a sense of equality around them. A lot of them were very much based around this idea that I was lesser, and that I was to be made fun of, and that I was kind of the butt of the joke. And so already, I think by the age of kind of 11, 12, I was already so unhappy with life. And I remember hating life. Like, I remember feeling like, you know, I wouldn't say that I felt suicidal, but I definitely felt like I didn't want to be around. I didn't, you know, it would be easier for me if if I was somebody else, or I didn't really exist at all, you know. And, you know, as I said, I'd stopped attending school. And so things were just really difficult at home as well. And, you know, I used to sort of trash my bedroom, and I used to go, I think maybe I was going missing already at this point, or staying out later than I should, things like that. You know, I was maybe not quite at that age actually, but I was definitely rebelling. And, you know, was sort of at that age where I couldn't be dragged to school. So I was just refusing to go, and all of that kind of stuff. And then I think things really, really hit the fan for me when I was starting high school. So I would have been about 12. And at that age as well, which I think this is something that isn't spoken about enough, I'd already been browsing the internet. I'd already accidentally come across like hardcore pornography and things like that. And there was not as much of a discussion around that stuff as there is now. So my mind was totally disturbed by, you know, certain things that I'd seen online, and there was no dialogue around that. There was, you know, it's kind of like that. And I think so many people have this, because so many people had unfiltered access to the internet because our parents were not looking out for this kind of stuff, you know. And I think that there are so many people who are robbed of their innocence in that way. So many young boys, so many young girls as well, who are robbed of their innocence in that way, and who find these sort of very explicit images and don't have any concept or narrative, or, you know, a way to really understand what is going on there and how unnatural a lot of that stuff is. And so I'd say that definitely had a big impact on me as well, in accordance with all of this other stuff, you know. And so by the age of 12, I started self-harming. I'd started high school and realized that, you know, I kind of thought when I went to high school, maybe I would find better friends and I would be better kind of received by people. And I think that was kind of what my mum and my dad maybe thought as well, because obviously I'd been struggling so much. I hadn't been going to school, and, you know, it's kind of like, you know, high school is going to change things, and it didn't. It was worse. And it was awful. Like, it was awful. And I remember I started self-harming. The first kind of major incident, I should have said trigger warning for self-harm as well. I peeled all of the skin off of my hand in the toilet. And I remember a teacher found me and was just like, looked at my hand and was like, what's wrong? What's going on with you? And, you know, but again, it was like, I didn't have a language to be able to say, well, you know, I'm experiencing all of this stuff and I don't know how to talk about it. You know, I didn't have the language to be able to express how terrible I felt inside. And so it kind of just exacerbated everything, because nobody really knew what was wrong with me. I didn't really know what was wrong with me either. And So again, I stopped attending school. I maybe attended high school there for maybe, I don't even think I lasted a couple of months. And I was like massively struggling with my mental health. My mum couldn't drag me to school. So I would be at home, I would put the little electric fire on and I would like exercise in front of the electric fire. And like looking back, knowing all that I know now, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I was struggling. Like that is not a child. At 12 years old, you know, like what is going on within the psyche of this child? And, you know, I didn't really have any friends. I ended up, you know, self-harming with my hair and ended up having to shave my head. And so then I was bald and 12, and you know, that's like not an age that is like acceptable for young girls to you know, to have like no hair, you know, by their peers, you know. So I really was, I think people did just think that I was insane. And a lot of people, you know, that maybe might have like had a bit of casual interaction with me, stopped having that casual interaction with me because it was like, okay, what's going on with her? And so I didn't go to school for ages, and it was at the point where, you know, police were involved, and, you know, it was this thing of like, well, you know, you have to go to school. And so it was my grandmother actually who had the idea to send me to an all-girls school, and thought that maybe that would help me a little bit to just, you know, be more supported. And so I moved school, and that didn't help one bit because you know, it was a private school, and, you know, I had a scholarship and I had a bursary, and I lived with my single mom who didn't have, you know, my mom was at college at this point, you know, who didn't have like a vast amount of money, obviously. And I was going to school with all these girls who had what ostensibly seemed like perfect lives. I'm sure they weren't, but from my perspective at that time, seemed like they had these perfect lives, and I just couldn't interact with them. I didn't have the ability to be able to communicate effectively with them, and we were just from such different worlds, you know. And I totally respect where my you know, my granny was coming from with that, and I think, to be honest, it was probably the best option at the time. However, it still wasn't ideal. And so that ended up with me, you know, not getting along with people at school, and I was seen as like, you know, the rebel. And that was all like, you know, when you're a teenager and you take on different identities because you're trying to work out who you are. So for ages, I was like the bad girl. I was like getting in trouble. I was like always talking back to teachers because that was all I could. That was kind of like, okay, maybe I'm accepted in this role, so I'm going to take it on. And to be fair, the teachers at that school were very, very supportive of me, you know, considering especially that I was there on scholarship and on bursary. My behaviour was not like conducive with meeting the standards of receiving those awards. However, they knew I was struggling, and they really believed in me as well, actually, and were just, you know, massively supportive of my situation. And so, you know, and they also moved me up a year at school, which I think they thought was going to help. And, you know, they were like, you know, you're very bright, you can manage it work-wise, and maybe it's going to benefit you to be around slightly older girls. I fell out with that year group as well. That didn't work. And so I then went on to leave that school as well. And I'd also, things with my mum had gotten so fractious at that time. My mum had asked me, my mum had kicked me out actually at this point when I was 14. My mum kicked me out and I had to go and live with my dad. And at this time as well, I'd kind of found more friends, and, you know, everyone who I made friends with was like, just wild. They were just wild, because that was like, I felt like that was the only people that I could actually fit in with, were people that were also like really struggling with life, you know, and that was kind of the only place where I felt like I'd found acceptance, you know. And so I, had all of these friends that were just, I say had all of these friends. I had one friend and he had the friends, and I was kind of just there getting, drunk, and all of that stuff, right? And so at this age, I'd kind of found escapism through alcohol. And although alcohol never agreed with me, it has never, ever, ever agreed with me. I've never been someone who could actually drink alcohol and be okay. But it was, it was what I had at the time. And so, my behavior is getting gradually more out of control. I'm going out late. I'm not coming home. My parents are calling the police on me. My mum's kicked me out. I'm now living with my dad. And I was going to have to move schools again to a school in my dad's area. And my dad lives just outside of Edinburgh, and the schools there are rough, okay? So I remember going to see the school that I was meant to be starting at. And I really wanted to live with my mum. Ideally, I would have lived with my mum because I got away with so much stuff, but that wasn't, available to me at that time. And so my dad tried to put me into this other school there, and I remember walking into that school and thinking, I am gonna get eaten alive, because obviously I was from Edinburgh as well. I'm mixed race. I mean, my dad lives just outside of Edinburgh in a much more kind of village mentality. And I just remember thinking, this is not gonna go down well. And I remember crying on the phone to my mom, and I was like, please, I'll do anything, let me come back and live with you. And eventually my mum relented, and she'd moved into another house at that point, and it was a temporary accommodation house. And so while we were waiting to be housed somewhere else, and in a very, very rough area, and my mum's car used to get smashed up, people used to shout black bastards up at the window, and it was just not great. But for me, I was actually okay. The rest of my family was really struggling, but I was actually okay because a lot of the people I'd made friends with were from this area. So I was like, oh my God, yeah, I'm part of something. And I started at another school, and bear in mind, because I got moved up a year, I'm also a year younger than everybody else. And I think that although the school I went to was, that put me up a year, was doing that for my best interest and things like that, it kind of didn't serve me in the end, because I ended up not doing my standard grades and being in 5th year doing my hires. And then as soon as I turned, so I was 15 when I was in 5th year. This is probably only going to make sense to Scottish people, but I turned 16 before before I did my hires. And so I left school with no qualifications, and I ended up falling out with everyone at that school as well. So I left school with no qualifications, and I was kind of didn't really know what to do with myself. But the good thing was I was 16 and I could get a job, and so I ended up finding a job at this hairdresser's, and that was actually probably quite good for me. And I was able to be creative, and I also had was able to have some money and things like that. So there was positive points to that. I'm still going out drinking and indulging in other things, though not intensely regularly at this point. And I met a guy. Now I was 16 and he was 21, which, looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, that's trouble. But to me at 16, I thought it was great. And also I had not ever really, I had at that point, probably from when I was 14, started getting more male attention, as often happens to young women. But I'd never had a boyfriend, and he was really keen on going out with me, and he had money, and he had all of these friends, and was involved in a lot of really dodgy activities. And I found that to be quite enthralling at that time, because I had that sort of wildness within me of not knowing who I was. And I've still got all of this wounding from childhood that I've not even nearly begun to unpack and examine at this point. And so I ended up, going out with him, and he was, a lot more sexually experienced than me and expected certain things from me that I wasn't able to give him. I had this real fear actually of sex. And it wasn't something that I wanted to, maybe something that I wanted to do, but I didn't really want to do at the same time. And he ended up giving me these very, very strong, they're kind of like painkillers, but they're prescribed for a number of different things actually. And he ended up giving me them and alcohol, and that was my first sexual experience, which I don't feel was consensual. I very much said no, and he very much continued. So for me, that was my first sexual experience, was in fact rape. And I didn't really understand that it was rape at that time. I think I kind of just pushed it to the back of my mind, and I continued going out with him, and we were like the most unhealthy couple ever, and he was physically violent to me. Anytime I would do anything nice for myself, I remember I got my hair done and he started an argument with me and poured beer over my head. He would make fun of me constantly in front of his friends. I didn't, have that many friends. And so, I was kind of like, quite isolated when I was with him, and I think he was very much aware of this and was, had sort of 4 or 5 years on me of just life experience, and used to manipulate me and put me down all the time, and was just emotionally, physically, and sexually abusive towards me. And very much, used me for his own ends, shall we say. And, for me, it was like, there was part of me that knew that it was wrong, but I remember I just didn't feel there was anything else available to me. And I think within like a few weeks of knowing him, I'd left my job. I was on benefits. I'd kind of moved in with him, and then I had applied, presented as homeless with the council, and I'd got my own flat when I was 17. And at this point, I was smoking weed all the time, every day. I was essentially struggling with anorexia, but I didn't know that that's what I was experiencing. Should have said trigger warning for eating disorders as well. And I was incredibly thin, and all I used to do was just smoke cigarettes and smoke weed and, eat very rarely. And so I was just incredibly thin and massively struggling with my mental health. When I was with him, I think I had more than one suicide attempt, or certainly I had at least one major one, and also numerous acts of like extreme self-harm, and from cutting myself to all sorts. And he was just not we were not good for each other. And so something kind of switched in my head when I was about to turn 18. So he had been involved in a lot of criminal activity, and because of this, had kind of forced me to leave my house and move outside of Edinburgh with him and his sister because of this dangerous situation that he had put us in. And so I kind of couldn't go back to my flat, or I think in a way it was part of all of his control as well. I think he would have very much liked us to live in a house that was in his name and things like that. And something just clicked. I remember staying with his being in his sister's, and it was a couple of days before my 18th birthday, and I just remember thinking, fuck this, like, I'm about to turn 18. And I think that was part of it as well, was his kind of he was older, he had more access to things, and I sort of relied on him a lot, and even just to sort of buy cigarettes or alcohol, or get us weed or whatever, and it was sort of like, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to turn 18. Like, I can do all this stuff myself. Like, I don't, you know, there was something, and I think it was much, much deeper than that, but maybe in my sort of the where my consciousness was at the time, I was seeing it as I've got this independence now and I'm gonna get out of this situation. And I remember like messaging my mom and just being like, you know, I need to leave this situation. And she was like, look, just tell him you're coming to stay at mine for your birthday, pack your bag and come. And I remember the feeling of, you know, I just said to him, yeah, I'm gonna go stay at my mum's for my birthday, packed my bag. And I had this little dog at the time as well, Lola, who was just my absolute angel, and I think got me through so much of the difficulty that I was experiencing. And I very much believe she was like an angelic soul. And I remember running. I left the house. I like, you know, I've got kind of out of sight of the house. And I just remember running because I was like, oh my God, he's gonna know that I've like, you know, that I'm leaving him. And I just remember running my little dog and he's like running alongside me and getting on the bus and going to my mum's and just being like, whoa, you know, I've just like escaped something there. And it took me so much to do that as well. You know, I'd been with him, I think about 2 years at this point, almost 2 years. And just my head was just wrecked. You know, I was so damaged. And so, you know, obviously he, you know, knew that I'd left and things like that. And, you know, I think part of it as well, I was like, I've got a whole flat here, council flat, that's getting paid for by the council for me to live there. And I'm not even living there, you know? And I was just like, fuck this. And so I went, you know, I think I stayed with my mum for a bit and then eventually I ended up moving back into that flat. And now I've got this flat to myself, you know, because he had always kind of stayed with me since I'd had it. And, you know, I was throwing all of these parties and, you know, just really like finding myself within that framework of being 18 and having your own flat. And so within about 3 months, I met another man who I was 18 and he was 26. And as someone who's 29 now, that's insane to me. And I remember when I turned 26, I was like, oh my God, that's disturbing, you know? And, you know, I think sometimes these things don't fully hit you until you're actually at the age that your abuser was. And then you realize how fucked up they really were and how traumatized and damaged they were. But, you know, he was everything that I had ever wanted in life, in a man. You know, he was very, very handsome, tall, and was very like streetwise and also like super smart and a great listener and seemed emotionally intelligent and really like bigged me up, you know, like really made me feel so good about myself in ways that I had never, ever, ever felt about myself before, ever. Like he was so complimentary of me, wanted me to meet all of his friends, you know, was constantly, you know, telling me how beautiful I was, how funny I was, how smart I was, all of the things that you want to hear, right? And we'd been together about 2.5 months and, you know, we were going out and, you know, every weekend we were taking a lot of drugs, we were partying and, you know, it was probably, for a long time, I felt, even after that relationship, that was the happiest 2.5 months of my life. And I wasn't ever sure I would ever feel that happy again. And after about 2.5 months of being together, I still don't remember what caused this argument. We'd never even argued before, ever. We had never even had even a minor disagreement. You know, we got along so well. Also, for the astrologers in the house, I'm Pisces, he was Virgo, which, you know, says a lot, those opposite energies. And he just attacked me out of nowhere. And, you know, I'm a very small woman. I'm like 5'1". At this time, I was incredibly thin. Like when I look back at how thin I was, it was scary. You know, I'm slender naturally, but I was like thin. And he was like, I'd say he was nearly 6 foot tall. So, you know, he was much, you know, almost a foot taller than me. And he was, you know, a broad built guy, like really like strong legs, and he just, you know, the word that comes to my mind is like annihilated me. Like I had no way to fight back. You know, me and my ex partner, we would like physically fight and he was like much stronger than me, but I would still kind of give it as good as I could. With my next partner, it was like I also like loved him so much. I didn't love my first partner in that way. Like you know, and I still very much stand by the fact that I do believe that for me, that was love, you know, like I loved him. Like it was unconditional. Like I would have done anything for him. And, you know, to the point where, you know, I stayed with him, after he had like, attacked me that one time. And, you know, he was like totally, you know, brutalized me, and I couldn't fight back. There was literally nothing I could do. And, you know, I remember afterwards, I don't remember the immediate aftermath. It's all a blur to me. But I remember he ended up crying, and I ended up like comforting him, and like, you know, and then these are the things, you know, if you've ever been in an abusive relationship like that, you understand those dynamics. It's like, if he'd have done that to me when we first met, the likelihood of me staying with him probably would have been much less. But because we had built up that rapport and I had all of these amazing memories, you know, we'd basically, since we'd met, spent about 2 months together, you know, and that's a long time, especially when you're young and you feel like, you know, you're in love and all of this stuff. It was like, I couldn't have imagined my life without him. And I was just so, you know, caught up in the relationship. And I thought that, you know, after he apologized, and you know what's interesting as well is he had told me, because we kind of told each other everything. We'd have to stay up all night and have these big conversations. We'd stay up for several days and have big conversations. He told me that he had been violent with other partners. Red flag. But he was like, you're so tiny, I could never do that to you. And I really believed him. And, you know, it was sort of that case of like, you know, I know people say with you know, abusive relationships, people say, you know, it's like one of the things people ask you is like, oh, why didn't you leave? And it's like, it's not as simple as that. There's whole chemical reactions that happen in your brain which actually prevent you from being able to find that place within yourself where you can leave. And there's a reason why you draw in abusive partners in the first place, you know, it's because you're on a match with them. There's part of you that believes that you deserve that. Obviously you don't, but there was part of me that did. You know, I'd already experienced a lot of difficulties. I'd witnessed violence in the home as a child, and so it was kind of that normalizes those experiences for you. And so I stayed with him, and obviously the violence didn't stop, you know, and, you know, through the week he would be violent and abusive and aggressive. And, you know, I was at college, and so, you know, sometimes I would wake up in the morning and he would still be sleeping, and I would have to tiptoe around the house trying to get my stuff, because if I woke him up, he would try and batter me before I went to college. And so, you know, there was mornings I had to grab my stuff, and I would hear him wake up and I would have to run out of the front door, you know, because otherwise, you know, I probably wouldn't have been going to college that day. And, you know, it was just, you know, harrowing. All of it was horrific. And, you know, I didn't have very many friends, and I hadn't seen my family in months. My family had no idea what was happening. They had no clue. They just knew I was with this guy. That was it, you know. So I didn't have anyone that was like, and this is no disrespect to anyone else, but I didn't have anyone that was like, what the heck's going on with her? You know, I didn't have anyone to like, who was like checking in on me in that way. And, you know, I think I was just incredibly, incredibly vulnerable. And so we had been together for maybe 6 months, and his violence had started to get worse. Now it had already been it was already really, really bad, okay? It was already really fucking bad. And I was also self-harming a lot, and because, you know, that's how I coped. So, you know, my arms were just a state, you know. I still have bad scars on my arms to this day. And I noticed that his violence was getting worse. And he had stabbed me with a screwdriver, and not very deep, but the intent was there. And he had really been like, there was a particular incident where he was like stamping on my head in my kitchen, and I was lying on the kitchen floor, and I remember thinking like, he wants to kill me. Like, I wasn't just like, because he would always he would avoid hitting my face because he would be worried that people would see, although he did hit my face, but he would avoid like giving me too many, you know, black eyes, things like that. He would like, it was my body he would hit. So my legs and my arms, my torso would always be covered in bruises. And yeah, so there was a particular incident, and it was, I think it was boxing. No, it was the 27th of December, 2012. And he kicked my leg when I was on the ground. And he, you know, bear in mind, this is a big, big guy. And at the time, my mum's friend was coming to pick me up, and she was going to take me shopping or something like that. And I remember I hadn't done anything like that in a long time. And she was like, oh, you know, I'll take you, you know, Christmas, you know, I'll take you out. And he kicked me on my right leg, and my mum's friend was actually waiting outside in her car, and I can't remember what, something had erupted. Okay. And I remember he was wearing these big shoes, and he kicked me, and I knew something was wrong. Like, I knew something was wrong. Like, my breath was taken away, and I was like, I remember just thinking like, oh God, like something really bad has happened to me, but I didn't know what it was. And I can't remember if he ran out the house first because he realized something was wrong, or I ran out the house first. I can't remember. But I remember, and I lived in a big high-rise flat, and I was on the first floor, thank God. And I still don't know to this day how I managed to run on my leg, because it was, you know, I'll explain, but I managed to run outside, run down the stairs, and I got to the stair door, and it was like my leg just gave way and I couldn't run anymore. And I opened the door and I just screamed for my mum's friend, like I could see her car, and I was like, help me, help me. And she, obviously nobody knows what's going on with me at this time. And she got out the car and she's just come running over to me. And she had to carry me back up the stairs to get my dog. I always feel so bad because my dog was, you know, with me during these abusive relationships. And she just used to hide under the sofa, and it was so sad. But she was like, at the same time, the one thing that actually kept me going, because I had this little dog that I had to look after. And so, you know, luckily I was so thin because my mom's friend managed to carry me up the stairs and go into the house, and he disappeared. And I just remember looking at my leg and being like, oh my God, like there's something really, really wrong with my leg. So we've grabbed some of my stuff, and she's like, right, I'm going to take you to your mom's. Like, what the hell's been going on? And I can't remember what I was saying to her. I think I was in shock at this point. So she's carried me back down, put me in the car with my dog. And I just remember looking down at my leg, and I was wearing these skinny jeans at the time, but I was so thin, they were like baggy on me. And I just remember my leg was swelling rapidly, like before my eyes, like my whole leg was swelling. And, you know, I'm barely filling out these jeans, and my leg is swelling to the point where it's like pushing stretching the jean material. And I just remember like screaming in the car, like I've never felt pain like it. And I actually was trying to pull my trousers down in the car because my leg was in so much pain. And it was just like swelling rapidly. And so we've got to my mum's, and my mum obviously has just been like, what the fuck has been going on? Like, what have you been up to? You know, and I still don't remember what I said, if I said that this was an ongoing thing. I told her obviously he'd done that to me. And they were like, we need to take you to hospital, like right now, like there's something seriously wrong. So I got to hospital, and the hospital were like, what the fuck is going on with your leg? Turned out, luckily I wasn't a broken bone, but I had severe internal bleeding in my leg. And, you know, internal bleeding is like the kind of wounds that are like sustained during like car accidents, you know, like he had like really kicked me. And my poor leg, oh my God, my leg now on my right side is still thinner than my left leg. Not as much because this was almost 11 years ago. But it's still, you can tell there's like a slight difference in my legs. And I had crutches, and I was just a mess. I was like, you know, my mum always says like about that time, she was like, I didn't know if you were going to make it. I didn't know what was going to happen because you were just so distraught, you know. And I remember trying to phone him, and, you know, and what I wanted was for him to say sorry, you know, and like, I don't even think he ever really said sorry to me, actually. And so I stayed with my mum for a few nights. I'm on these heavy painkillers. So that was the 27th that happened. By the 31st of December, by New Year's, I was back with him. And I understand some people will be like, what? But that's how deeply I was under his spell. That's how deeply I didn't love myself. That's how deeply, I think on some level, I believed that I deserved what I was receiving. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there, you know? And so he was also like racist to me. He would beat me up, calling me a black bitch, a nigger bitch, all of that stuff as well, you know, which probably didn't help my self-esteem, you know. And so we ended up getting back together, and within about 3 weeks he broke my ribs. So I couldn't go up the stairs or anything at that time because obviously I was on crutches, and I think he got a little bit sick of like having to like look after me. And you know, I lied to my mom and said I wasn't back with him. Obviously I was. And yeah, he kicked me in the back, broke my ribs, and I had like damage to my spleen. My spleen was bruised, and I had to go to hospital by myself because I didn't have anyone to go with me. It was like awful. And eventually, so that was like January. So then by February, he was so I've missed out this large part of the story. So my mum had called the police when my leg had happened, and the police did come round and speak to me. No, sorry, I forget exactly the timeline, but so there was some sort of police involvement. Somehow the police got called, something like that. I feel like it was my mum, and we gave them photos of my leg and things like that. We maybe didn't report it at that exact time, but maybe when my ribs I can't remember. That's so crazy. I actually cannot remember exactly what happened. But at some point, the police got involved. They knew what had happened. And I remember them saying to my mum, they were like, this is one of the worst cases of domestic abuse we have ever dealt with. And they were trying to like get a hold of him, or so we'd split up, and so the police had got phoned to my house. I think I'd called my mum. This is terrible storytelling. I think I called my mum one time when he was attacking me, and I think this was around February time. So maybe this was how the police got involved, actually. And I remember he was attacking me, and again, it was one of those times where I was like, he's gonna kill me. He is gonna kill me. And I managed to call my mum and just scream down the phone, and my mum called the police. So I think that was the first time the police got involved, and they came round to my house. He'd already ran away at this point, and they'd found drugs, a large amount of drugs, which, you know, predominantly were his. Not going to say I wasn't involved in, you know, consuming them, but very much so they were his drugs, right? And they obviously could see, and I remember I was standing in my bra and a pair of tights because that was the state that I'd been in when he had started to attack me. And they've just seen like this little girl, I think, essentially, because that's what I looked like at that time. I was, 18. I looked like I was about 14. And they were like, what's been going on? They've searched the house and they found his stash, and they basically said, I think they knew that this wasn't just me that was involved in this situation. And I ended up telling them, look, he's abusive to me, blah, 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 all of this stuff. They could see, I'm not well. I was still on crutches at that point. And so my mum and me have ended up like filing a report saying, that this obviously is domestic abuse has been going on, and showed them photos of my leg. They found the screwdriver with the blood on it, and they were actually trying to get him done with attempted murder, but there wasn't enough evidence or something like that. And so they also had all these messages on my phone where he's like racially abusing me. And so they were trying to get him on all of this stuff and they couldn't find him. He obviously kept moving location. And then at that time as well, he also broke into my house. And they knew it was him because he'd cut himself when he broke through my window and had like blood. They had his blood, and so they were able to, get him for housebreaking, racial harassment, like assault and battery, something like that. So he did end up going to prison. And at this time, I was so broken. Like, I can't express how damaged I was at this time. And I couldn't eat, I think I had such severe PTSD just from everything that I'd experienced in life up until that point, and particularly as well that relationship. That relationship messed me up for a long time. Probably until I was about 25, I was still heavily dealing with the trauma of that, because it was someone that I'd loved so much, and my trust issues were just like, they were just destroyed at that point. I was so struggling just to trust people. I was still 18 at this point, almost 19 maybe at this point, and just in such a different place from my peers. A lot of people I went to school with were going to university or getting jobs or their first car, and I was escaping this horrific abusive relationship, and so I couldn't relate to anyone around me. The friends that I did have, I couldn't relate to them. They couldn't relate to me. And so it was just an incredibly difficult time. And I also had, a drug addiction at this point, serious, drug habit. And I felt that the only way for me to support myself, to live, and I think I devalued myself so much at this point that it seemed logical to me at that time to go into prostitution. And that was the only way that I could foresee me being able to live my life. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up working at a number of different, I'd worked in many brothels, shall we say. And this was really the part of my story that I was most embarrassed isn't the right word, because I understand where I was coming from and why I entered into that, and why women enter into prostitution, generally speaking, why women enter into sex work. But there's still part of me that is worried about what other people will think about that, or particularly the way that I might be viewed because of that. So anyway, I decided that was going to be my best option. And that was what was going to, give me, not only like financial security, which I'd never had my whole life, my own financial security. And so I decided that was what I was going to do. And obviously that just ended up with me getting into so many horrific situations. And it's a difficult thing to explain to people who've never been involved in things like that, but it becomes a lifestyle. It's not just that's never just a job. That's a lifestyle. And the place where I first started working, I made some really close kind of sisterhood bonds there, because you're the only ones that know what you're doing for the most part. Nobody shouts about that kind of work. And just to contextualize this as well, this was like 2013. So this was before OnlyFans. Cam girling was kind of just starting to be a viable thing to make money from. This was a totally different time. And I was the youngest girl who worked in the first place I worked at by far. I think the next oldest girl was like 26. And the bonds that you create there are very very strong and kind of in some ways indescribable, because you're all in the shit together and you're all nuts, okay? You're all like deeply traumatized individuals. I don't care what anybody says. You don't find really healthy, happy people that go into prostitution. Nobody's ever going to convince me of that. I know there are narratives, especially liberal Western narratives, that want to legitimize prostitution and try and say that there's something empowering about it. Bullshit, I say. Those are usually from people that have never been involved in it, or are from I don't know. I'm not going to go there. But anyway, that to me is highly and wholly inaccurate. And this is coming from, I worked in numerous brothels all across the UK, and I never once met somebody that was like, yeah, I love this job. This job's amazing. I'm here because I love it. It was always economical reasons. Romanian girls, Polish girls, who have come from Europe, who are just trying to make a buck, or girl, there was rarely I met a girl who had not experienced some form of sexual trauma, and that was just apparent from their behavior, let alone from the conversations that we would all have. Drug, alcohol problems featured massively. I don't think I ever met a girl that was sober doing that, and so it was, deeply deeply traumatizing, the whole thing. But I also, I felt like it was all I could do, and so I worked at this one place, and there was a number of very awful things that happened there. Scotland is different from England because Scotland has licensing laws, so the brothels here tend to be licensed. They have an entertainment license, so they run as massage parlors. And when I was working there, although you are afforded some level of protection because there's someone on the door and things like that, what takes place in the rooms is often somewhat feels like with your control. Sometimes men get very carried away. Sometimes it's hard to assert your bodily autonomy, your boundaries. Sometimes it's hard to be clear about what you will and won't do. So yeah, it was, there was many difficult experiences I experienced within the brothel setting. So I can't remember when, but after I'd been working there for a while, the police so in Scotland, the police used to be Lothian and Borders Police in Edinburgh, and then they were amalgamated into Police Scotland. So it was centralizing the police system and the police service. And the guy that had taken over, I think his name was Stephen House or something, he decided that to kind of make his mark on, taking over Police Scotland, he was going to clamp down on all the brothels in Edinburgh. So all the brothels got raided. It was crazy. The police came in, raided everything. Oh my God, it was crazy. And and so that kind of it was really risky working there. Although I did end up doing some time at other, you know, like a sentence, doing some time at other brothels and things like that, but in Edinburgh, but you were always there very much under the risk that it was going to get shut down, and so there wasn't really much job security. And you know, at this point as well, I also had, you know, was doing like escorting outside of the brothels as well, and that's just very fucking dangerous. And you know, bearing in mind I'm like this very young looking woman, very petite, you know, and so I started traveling to England to work in different brothels, and you are not afforded the same luxury, I would say, that you are in Scotland because of the entertainment licenses in Edinburgh. They would tend to be cleaner and things like that. In England, there's no hygiene standards. There's no like, there's just a lot less protection. You know, generally in the ones in Edinburgh, if a guy was too drunk, you probably wouldn't be allowed in, or, you know, there'd be some kind of awareness around that, you know. But the ones in England, you know, because as well, the ones in Edinburgh are only operate from like 10 in the morning till 10 at night. And, you know, so sometimes you would be doing 12-hour shifts. Sometimes you've been on a half day, sometimes you've been on a full day. And, but yeah, so the ones in England, they could be open from like 10 in the morning till 6 in the morning, right the way around. And, you know, it's your choice basically, or well, not, I mean, you know, you're asked to do, you're put down for certain shifts basically. So, you know, I worked at places in Manchester, Preston, Sheffield, you know, there's a lot of that kind of thing going on there. And this was when I think it had really started to take a toll on me. I think that my post-traumatic stress disorder had got so bad, you know, it was like I really remember struggling to be polite to people. And, you know, that's not good for business. And the owners don't like it when you're not polite to people, you know. And so I was really, I think at that time, really falling apart. My drug addiction was height of heights, you know, and, you know, I was just uppers, downers constantly. I was never sober. And, you know, just incredible, just, you know, punishing my body essentially. And so I'm just trying to think where to go from here. How to explain. So I ended up in a situation with a brothel in one of the cities where I used to go to, where I was raped really viciously by a man. And it took place outside of the brothel, and he had like booked me when we had been during opening hours. And I think he probably saw me coming a mile off, you know, and easy victim. And, you know, he seemed very charming. He had a lot of drugs on him, and I do remember thinking to myself, like, I am gone, because he had been just feeding me all of these drugs while we were in the place. And he said to me, look, let's get a hotel, like, just come and stay. Where are you staying tonight? And obviously, you know, that was the awful thing as well, is that you'd often stay in the brothel, you know. It's like, it's that thing of like, you're working there and you're sleeping there. It's not good. And so he said to me, you know, come, you know, we'll get a hotel. And I said to him, okay, but like, you know, we're not doing anything sexual because, you know, I'm working tomorrow. So, you know, there's only so much the body can take. And I said to him, yeah, that wasn't going to be on the cards. And he's like, yeah, no problem. We're just going to listen to music, keep, you know, taking stuff and whatever. And so and you know what he said as well? He was like, if you don't come outside, I'm going to bang on the door and I'm going to come in and get you. And it's like, you know, looking back on it now, you're just like, don't go. Obviously don't go. But at the time, that wasn't within my remit of understanding. And so I ended up going, and, you know, bear in mind I had like my little suitcase with me. My suit's gone in the trunk of his car. We've gone to this hotel and everything was fine at first. And then it's one of those things, like trauma does funny things to your memory. I don't remember exactly how it happened. I just remember being like outside of my body and watching myself get raped, essentially. And I remember after it finished, you know, after he had finished, I was like in such a massive state of shock, you know, and I was like shaking, and I just remember, you know, being in a complete and utter state of shock, and also not being able to leave, not being able to get my stuff out of his car. And yeah, so eventually he dropped me back off at the brothel. And what's really weird is that the universe was almost foreshadowing that something like this was going to happen to me, because I had been in London the day, for a few days before, and I had been meant to be going to this other city to go and work there. And I went to the train station. I missed my train, and I was like, shit, I've missed my train. And there was a guy who I'd been talking to, because I'd been to this brothel a number of times before. And there was this guy who was a regular there, and he was like, "Are you going to be in tonight?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know, I've just missed my train." And he was like, "Look, just get a train here and I'll come and pick you up." And I was like, I had a funny feeling about it. And I was like, I don't really want to do this, but I also need to get to work. So I accepted his offer, and I got a train to this other place, and he came and he picked me up. And I remember he had someone else in the car with him. And I remember thinking, shit, this isn't good. This isn't good. I got in the back of the car, and I remember thinking, just keep normal, just stay normal, everything's fine. And I had 999 dialed on my phone in the back seat of the car, and I was holding my phone like this, 999, ready to, you know, in case, because we're driving along the motorway, and I was thinking they could just pull over to the side of the road. Nobody would know what had happened to me. Nobody even knows where I am. And I remember thinking, oh my God, they're gonna rape me. I remember thinking that. And we just kept talking, and, you know, I just kept cracking jokes and just, you know, just keep it light, keep it normal, keep it light. And nothing happened. But it, you know, had that funny feeling nonetheless. And so then I've obviously met that other guy who's taken me to the hotel, and X, Y, and Z's happened. So later that day, my friend who wasn't working the night before, she's turned up, who obviously also worked there. And I said, I just basically got raped by this guy. And I told her that I'd also got a lift from this other guy to take me. And she was like, well, that guy that gave you the lift, he's known to take girls away, traffic them, and gang rape them. And so what was happening there was that he was bringing that other guy to check me out, to scope me out, to see if I was a suitable candidate. And obviously they don't do it on the first time, you know, that rarely happens. It does happen, but usually they'll try and build a rapport with you. And so I kind of realized I'd like dodged I don't know if I dodged a bullet, because something horrific had still happened to me that night, you know. And but I remember being like, well, that's really dodgy. It's really dodgy. Yeah, and so, you know, at this point I had just such bad PTSD. And I remember I got home, and I knew it was really bad, because so at the brothels there's always towels on the bed, so you can change the towel when, you know, if it's a good place, they'll let you change the towel after every customer. If it's not, then you might have the same towel all night. But there was a towel on my bed in my bedroom, and I think I'd got out of the shower or something, and I touched the towel and I had a full-on, full-body post-traumatic stress disorder flashback. And I thought, fuck, I am like really in trouble here, because all I've done is touch a towel on my bed and I've had, you know, a full-on flashback. And so I knew that there was something slightly off, shall we say, with me. And you know, at this point I was just you know, I've just been in so many dodgy situations. You know, I'd been in situations where guys had been very, you know, I'd had another, that was like the main experience of like full-on rape that I'd had. But I'd had experiences where guys had sexually assaulted me numerous times. I'd had experiences where guys had been rough and violent with me. You know, I'd had all sorts of deeply traumatic experiences, and it was almost like that was kind of in many ways, like the sort of pinnacle, if you will. And what I really think was happening was the universe was telling me, you need to stop this. Something really awful is going to happen to you. And, you know, I was just continually putting myself in these risky situations. It's only a matter of time until something really terrible happens, you know. And I mean, there are many more stories I could go into, but for my own sake, my own self-preservation, you know, it's a lot for me to talk about this stuff. You know, I have done so much healing. By God, I have done so much healing, you know, but it's also these things move in spirals, they move in cycles. And so although I've done, you know, so much healing on my sexual trauma, there are still times when certain things can affect me, you know. And you know, despite this being like and you know, a good number of years ago. And so I sort of came to the sort of notion that I was gonna have to leave prostitution, that it wasn't serving me anymore, that it was like, you know, causing me more anguish. And I think I kind of wanted to live a normal life as well. You know, it was that thing of like, people were finding out what I was doing. It's very unusual for an 19-year-old girl to have a lot of money. And I had a lot of money that I spent all on drugs, of course. You know, none of it was, I don't have anything of it now. I spent it all on drugs, on getting my hair done. I had a ridiculous amount of clothes, of shoes. It was like materialism gone mad, you know. It was like because I hadn't grown up being able to have all of these things, you know, I just went crazy with it. I just was like, I'm just buying everything. I would buy things for my friends. I bought my friend a cat. I was like, you know, I was very generous with my money. I would buy drugs for everybody. Generous. I would buy drugs for everybody. You know, I would buy drinks for everybody. And, you know, I think as well, it gave me this like sense of security, you know, in this really unsafe way. And so I decided that I was going to leave, but I was still escorting, you know, because you build up rapport with people, you build up connections, all based on nothing wholesome, shall we say. But I had people men that would, you know, pay me a lot for a very small amount of my time. And so I, you know, would still, because I wasn't about to go from earning crazy money to going, you know, back on benefits and having 50 quid a week. You know, that wasn't going to happen. I had to wean myself off it. And, you know, that's, you know, they call prostitution the game, you know, because you get addicted to the money, you get addicted to the lifestyle. And, you know, like I say, it was very few people my age who were earning the kind of money that I was. And, you know, I was, it gives you such freedom, you know, but you're also enchained and imprisoned because you don't want anyone to know what you're doing. And yet they end up finding out because, you know, such as the laws of this universe, the laws of resistance, you know, is that people did end up finding out, and you know, obviously, and then there's the judgment that comes with that, you know, and all of that kind of trauma and all of the paranoia. My God, I was so paranoid, and that was the drugs. But it was also what I was doing and the lifestyle that I was living, and the fact that I didn't want anybody to know, but people did know. And yeah, it was a really horrific time of my life, and one that was, you know, I wouldn't wish on anybody. And so I decided I was going to leave. I decided I was going to go to college. You know, I'd always been, despite all my troubles, I'd always been very academic and always been very able to, you know, I mean, I was moved up a year at school. That shows you that I was perfectly capable of doing all of that stuff. I just didn't want to. And I think I sort of felt like, you know, that there was this thing in me that I needed to, I felt like I was made for more. I think that's what it was. I had started to realize I was made for more than what I was experiencing. I should also say as well that around 2011, so I was probably around 17, I really started to wake up. And I know a lot of my actions are actions of someone that's consciously aware, but I mean, I started to become aware that like my thoughts created my reality, things like that. And I kind of had put it down to mental health issues at the time as well, because I would think about things, and then the next day that exact same thing would happen. And, you know, I think I was opening up oracularly. I was opening up psychically more so. I was reading timelines and things, but I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing. And I remember crying on the phone to my dad, and I was like, Dad, like everything I think seems to happen. And I remember my dad was just like, my dad's not into that kind of stuff, you know, and no one around me was. And I think my dad was just like, oh my God, my daughter is insane, you know, she's like she's not well, you know. And so, you know, I was dealing with all of that side of things as well. And with my second partner, I think what was kind of nourishing about that relationship was, you know, he was very aware of like manifestation and all of that kind of, you know, so we used to kind of talk about all of that kind of stuff. And was probably the only person in my life who was kind of aware of that kind of thing as well. And was, you know, we would have this almost like telepathic kind of style of communication and things like that, you know. So I was very much opening psychically, spiritually, whilst also dealing with all this other stuff, you know. And so I, you know, I think that's also what exacerbated my drug use, was because I was trying to shut down my sensitivities. I was trying to shut down my feeling states, you know, and not be so open, which had been my problem my whole life, was that I was so open, was that I was so sensitive, that I was so Piscean. I'm a Pisces stellium, you know, so it's a lot of watery, psychic, open energy, you know, it's very boundless, it's very limitless. And so that had very much impacted me in a way that was, you know, it was challenging for me to know where I started and where I ended and other people began, you know. That was always something I felt like I was battling. And, you know, so all of that kind of emotional, kind of empathic kind of nature that is within me, you know, I think very much led me into all of these situations as well, because I struggled to place any boundaries for myself, you know. And all of the things that I have struggled with are very much the shadow of Pisces, are very much the shadow of Scorpio as well, you know. Pisces Sun, Scorpio Deacon. And so it's the shadow of that is like sex and boundaries, and Neptune, which is like illusion and fantasy and addiction. as well. So I can see very like astrologically where my issues have come from as well. And so I think that I'm gonna leave it here from where I decided to leave prostitution, and then I will do a part 2 with the next part of my story and how I've got to where I am now, and talk about all of my healing and how I have shifted so much of this stuff. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for witnessing me. If you have made it to the end, like really, like thank you for witnessing me. And I had this thing coming through me, just like, you need to share your story and you need to be open about it, and you need to, you know, there's keys and codes in here for other people. And so I imagine if you've got this far, then you're one of those people. And I just want to say thank you so much, and I really appreciate that, and just sending all of my love your way, and have major blessings for whatever you're doing today.